power is the loudest thing in the room during the day. But at 2 a.m., in a penthouse overlooking the glittering, icy grid of Chicago, power is dead silent. Donna Castiglione, a man whose mere whisper could orchestrate the demise of rival syndicates, was suffocating in that silence. Every night, the ghosts of his empire sat with him in the dark. He thought he was entirely alone in his gilded, blood-stained cage. He was wrong. The woman buffing the mahogany floor wasn't just a ghost in a blue uniform. She was the one person brave enough to break the silence. The top floor of the Oakhaven Tower was a fortress disguised as a corporate headquarters. By day, Castiglione Logistics was a bustling hub of international shipping, legitimate contracts, and sharp-suited executives. By night, it was the nerve center of the most ruthless organized crime syndicate in the Midwest. Donna Castiglione, the head of the family since his father's violent passing 3 years prior, hated the night. The daytime required a mask, the stoic, untouchable Don who commanded absolute loyalty and dealt out fatal consequences without a twitch of his jaw. But when the sun set over Lake Michigan and the sprawling office emptied out, the mask began to crack. Donna spent his nights sitting in his sprawling corner office. The room was a monument to intimidation, featuring dark mahogany, black leather, and floor-to-ceiling windows that made him look like a god surveying his domain. Yet, slumped in his chair with a heavy crystal tumbler of Macallan 25 resting on his knee, he looked like a prisoner. He was 34, but the heavy lines around his dark, calculating eyes made him look a decade older. The silence of the room was deafening, filled only by the phantom echoes of men pleading for their lives, or the harsh, ringing memory of gunshots that had secured his throne. And then there was the hum of the vacuum cleaner. Sylvia Hayes was practically part of the furniture. Hired through a third-party, heavily vetted corporate cleaning service, she was a 30-year-old woman who moved through the shadows of the executive suites with the quiet precision of a ghost. She wore a standard navy blue smock, her dark blonde hair tied back into a severe utilitarian bun. Sylvia had a strict rule for surviving in a building where men left burner phones, wads of $100 bills, and occasionally blood-stained handkerchiefs in their trash cans. See nothing, hear nothing, be nothing. For 6 months, she had cleaned Donna's office. She would enter at exactly 1:30 a.m. Donna would be sitting in the dark, staring out at the city. He never acknowledged her. She never looked at him. She would empty his ashtray, wipe down the sprawling desk, careful never to disturb the meticulously stacked ledgers, and vacuum the thick Persian rug. They existed in the same space, separated by an invisible, impenetrable wall of class, power, and fear. Sylvia knew exactly who he was. Everyone in the city with a pulse knew the Castiglione name. But Sylvia had a past of her own, one she had fled from across 3 state lines. She knew that monsters didn't hide under beds. They wore tailored Italian suits and stared out of penthouse windows. So she kept her head down, until a bitter Tuesday in late November. It had been a catastrophic day for the syndicate. The feds had raided a warehouse down by the docks, seizing millions in assets, and Donna had discovered the leak was a man named Peter Genko, a capo who had bounced Donna on his knee when he was a toddler. Donna had given the order to eliminate Peter at 9 p.m. By 1:30 a.m., when Sylvia pushed her cart into the office, the air in the room was suffocatingly thick. It smelled of expensive scotch, stale tobacco, and a cold, sharp dread. Sylvia began her routine. She wiped down the glass coffee table, her movements methodical. But as she moved toward the desk, a sudden, explosive sound shattered the quiet. Donna had hurled his heavy crystal tumbler across the room. It smashed against the oak-panelled wall, raining shards of glass and amber liquor onto the carpet. Sylvia froze. Her hand tightened around her microfiber cloth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, an old, familiar panic flaring in her chest. "Don't look up," her survival instincts screamed. "Clean it up and get out." Donna was leaning forward, his head buried in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking in a silent, violent tremor. The Don of the Chicago underworld was breaking apart at the seams. Sylvia walked over to the closet, retrieved a dustpan and a handheld brush. She knelt by the wall, quietly sweeping up the fragments of the broken tumbler. The scent of the scotch was overpowering. She gathered every piece, wiped the damp stain on the wall, and stood up. She should have left the room right then. It was dangerous to witness the vulnerability of a dangerous man. But as she looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, she didn't see a mob boss. She saw the crushing, isolating weight of a life built on violence. She recognized the profound loneliness radiating from him. It was a loneliness she knew intimately. Sylvia walked over to the edge of his massive desk. She didn't cower. She didn't tremble. She stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her navy smock. "Mr. Castiglione," she said. Her voice was soft, melodic, but completely devoid of fear. Donna's head snapped up. His eyes, rimmed with red, locked onto her. For a split second, a flash of pure, feral danger crossed his face. He was not used to being perceived, let alone addressed, by the help. His hand instinctually drifted toward the drawer where he kept his Sig Sauer. "What?" he rasped, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Get out!" Sylvia didn't move. She held his fierce, threatening gaze with a calm, steady neutrality. "You're carrying a room full of ghosts tonight," Sylvia said quietly, her words slicing through the heavy air. "Do you want me to listen?" For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound in the penthouse was the low hum of the city traffic far below. Donna stared at the cleaner, completely derailed. He expected terror from civilians. He expected groveling. He did not expect this quiet, unassuming woman to look him in the eye and casually offer to shoulder the weight of his sins. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" Donna finally said, his tone dropping an octave, laced with a quiet menace meant to send her running. "I know exactly who you are," Sylvia replied, not taking a step back. "I also know that if you keep swallowing whatever is choking you tonight, you're going to have a heart attack before you're 40. I'm off the clock in 20 minutes. I can vacuum or I can listen. Up to you." Donna let out a harsh, incredulous laugh that held no humor. He leaned back in his leather chair, studying her. She was unremarkable at first glance, but as he really looked, he noticed the rigid, disciplined posture. He noticed the way her eyes darted to his hands, assessing his movements. She wasn't just a cleaner. She was someone who knew how to calculate threats. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the leather armchair opposite his desk. Sylvia carefully parked her cleaning cart near the door and took a seat. She sat on the edge of the cushion, her back straight, her hands resting in her lap. "What's your name?" Donna asked, pouring himself another drink from a fresh glass. He didn't offer her one. "Sylvia." "Sylvia," he rolled the name around. "You're either incredibly brave, Sylvia, or incredibly stupid. I'm just a woman who knows what it looks like when someone is drowning," she said plainly. Donna's jaw tightened. He looked down at the amber liquid in his glass. Then, slowly, as if a dam was cracking, the words began to spill out. He didn't confess to crimes. He wasn't a fool. But he spoke in the thinly veiled metaphors of his world. He spoke about a business partner he had known since childhood. A partner who had sold corporate secrets to a rival firm. a partner who had to be let go tonight. The logic is sound, Donna murmured, staring at the city lights. If a foundation is cracked, you remove the stone. But the stone, he swallowed hard. The stone was there when I buried my mother. The stone taught me how to drive. Sylvia listened. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She didn't tell him he did the right thing, nor did she judge him. It's the betrayal that makes the blood cold, isn't it? Sylvia asked quietly. It forces you to realize that love and loyalty aren't the same currency, and in your line of work, you can only afford to trade in one. Donna's eyes snapped to hers, a profound shock rippling through him. It was the most astute, brutally honest assessment of his life anyone had ever dared to articulate. His own underboss, Vincent Corallo, would have just told him that Peter Genko was a rat who got what he deserved. But Sylvia saw the human cost. Where did a cleaner learn to dissect betrayal? Donna asked, leaning forward, genuinely intrigued. Dirt is dirt, Mr. Castiglione, Sylvia said, standing up as she checked her modest wristwatch. Whether it's on a floor or in a man's heart, you just have to know which chemical cuts through the grime. Have a good night. She walked to her cart, pushed it out the door, and left Donna sitting in the dark. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel suffocating. That night birthed a bizarre, secret ritual. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Sylvia would arrive at 1:30 a.m. She would clean for 15 minutes, and then she would sit in the leather chair. Donna would talk. He talked about the suffocating pressure of his father's legacy. He talked about the paranoia of walking into a room and wondering which of his smiling lieutenants was calculating the price of his head. Sylvia became his sanctuary. She was entirely divorced from his violent world, yet she understood the mechanics of survival perfectly. She shared small fragments of herself, that she loved jazz, that she drank her coffee black, that she hated the smell of bleach. But she kept her past heavily guarded. The intimacy of their conversations began to subtly shift the atmosphere in the room. The air felt charged when she entered. Donna found himself lingering at the office, pushing his meetings late into the evening just to ensure he was there when her cart rattled down the hallway. He started ordering premium coffee to be left in the break room for the night staff. He learned the scent of her soap, a cheap, clean lavender that he began to prefer over the expensive perfumes of the women in his social circle. But a secret in the Castiglione family never stayed buried for long. Vincent Corallo, Donna's ruthless, impeccably dressed underboss, began to notice a shift in his Don. Donna was less volatile. He was making decisions with a chilling, calm clarity, rather than his usual fiery rage. Vincent, a man who thrived on chaos and manipulation, viewed Donna's newfound centeredness as a threat to his own influence. One late night, Vincent returned to the penthouse to retrieve a forgotten ledger. As he stepped off the private elevator, he heard voices. Pausing in the shadowed hallway, Vincent peered through the slightly cracked door of the Don's office. He expected to see Donna entertaining a high-end escort or conspiring with a rival. Instead, he saw Donna Castiglione, the most feared man in Chicago, leaning against his desk, softly laughing at something a woman in a blue cleaning smock had just said. Vincent watched as Donna reached out, his lethal, scarred hands gently taking a dusting cloth from the woman's grip, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Vincent's eyes narrowed, a predatory smile creeping onto his face. Donna had a weak spot, a civilian. And in their world, a weak spot was nothing but a target. The storm broke on a Thursday. A torrential downpour lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Oakhaven Tower, obscuring the Chicago skyline in a blur of gray and neon. Sylvia was buffing the conference room table down the hall from Donna's office. It was 2:15 a.m. Donna had not been in his office when she arrived. The room had felt hollow, devoid of the heavy, magnetic energy he usually provided. She told herself she didn't care. She was just doing her job. But the knot of disappointment in her stomach betrayed her. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the executive suite crashed open, echoing like a gunshot over the thunder outside. Sylvia jumped, instinctively backing into the shadows of the conference room. She heard the wet, heavy thud of footsteps dragging across the hardwood, followed by a harsh, agonizing groan. Peering around the doorframe, her breath hitched. Donna was stumbling down the hallway. His expensive charcoal suit was soaked, not just with rain, but with a dark, spreading stain that clung to his side. He was clutching his ribs, his face deathly pale, leaving a smeared trail of crimson on the glass walls as he leaned against them for support. He had been ambushed. A supposed peace summit with the Russian syndicate on the south side had been a setup. 2 of his bodyguards were dead in an alley. Donna had barely made it to his armored car, driving himself back to the only fortress he trusted. He couldn't go to a hospital. Gunshot wounds meant police, and police meant vulnerability. He needed to get to his private safe, grab his emergency medical kit, and call his underground doctor. He didn't make it to the desk. His legs gave out just inside the doorway of his office, and he collapsed heavily onto the Persian rug. "Dom!" The name tore from Sylvia's throat before she could stop it. She abandoned her cart, sprinting down the hall and dropping to her knees beside him. Donna gasped, his eyes rolling back slightly. "Sylvia, get out!" he managed to choke out. They might have followed." "Shut up," she ordered, her voice completely devoid of its usual soft neutrality. It was sharp, authoritative, and laced with iron. She ripped open his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was saturated with blood. Without hesitation, she gripped the fabric of his shirt and tore it open, exposing the jagged, bleeding bullet hole tearing through his lower left abdomen. Donna hissed in pain, grabbing her wrist with a bloodied hand. Call Dr. Evans. Number's in my top drawer." "He's 30 minutes away. You'll bleed out in 10, Sylvia said rapidly. Her eyes scanned the room. "Where is your kit?" "Safe. Behind the painting," he wheezed, his grip on her wrist weakening. Sylvia scrambled to the painting, practically tearing it off the wall. She inputted the code she had deduced weeks ago, just from observing the wear on the keypad buttons, hauled the heavy medical bag out, and rushed back to him. Her hands moved with terrifying efficiency. She didn't flinch at the sight of the mangled flesh. She snapped on sterile gloves, ripped open a package of quick-clot gauze, and pressed it brutally into the wound. Donna roared in agony, his back arching off the floor. "Hold still!" Sylvia yelled, leaning her entire body weight onto her hands, pressing down on the wound. "Look at me, Donna, look at me!" His hazy, pain-filled eyes locked onto hers. Her face was inches from his, her breathing ragged, a stray lock of blonde hair falling across her forehead. "Breathe with me," she commanded. "In and out. Focus on my voice." As she packed the wound, taping it down with heavy pressure dressings to stem the arterial flow until the doctor arrived, the adrenaline began to level out. The silence of the room returned, broken only by their heavy breathing. Donna stared up at her. His blood was on her hands, on her blue smock. Yet, she looked completely at home in the chaos. There was no panic, no screaming, just a cold, calculated medical precision. "You're not just a cleaner," Donna whispered, his voice trembling from the shock, his hand weakly lifting to brush the stray hair from her forehead. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through them both, a sudden, jarring intimacy amidst the gore. Sylvia froze, her hand still pressing down on his stomach. Her eyes darkened, pulling back from the connection. I used to clean up worse messes than this, she muttered bitterly. Before Donna could ask what she meant, a heavy thud echoed from the floor beside them. When she had torn his jacket open, a burner phone had slipped from his inner pocket. The screen lit up in the dim room, signaling an incoming text message. Sylvia glanced down at it. Her blood ran ice cold. The notification on the screen read, "Sender, Daisy Hayes. Message, Castiglione is hit. Sweep the tower. Leave no witnesses." Sylvia stopped breathing. The name on the screen belonged to a man she had spent the last 4 years hiding from. Daisy Hayes, her abusive ex-husband, a sociopathic enforcer for a rival gang in Detroit. She looked from the phone down to Donna, who was watching her face drain of color. "Sylvia," he rasped. "What is it?" Her hands began to shake, uncontrollably. She hadn't just been cleaning the office of a Mafia boss. She had been cleaning the office of the man who was currently at war with the very monster she had fled her entire life to escape. And now, the monster was coming up the elevator. "Sylvia!" Donna's voice was a harsh, wet rasp. The blood loss was making his skin translucent in the dim light of the office, but his dark eyes were razor-sharp, tracking the sudden terror paralyzing her. "Who is Daisy?" Sylvia stared at the glowing screen of the burner phone, the words, "Leave no witnesses," burning into her retinas. For 4 years, she had looked over her shoulder. She had changed her social security number, dyed her hair, and scrubbed her fingerprints raw with harsh chemicals. She had traded a life of terrifying luxury in Detroit for a minimum-wage smock in Chicago. And it hadn't been enough. "He's the devil," Sylvia whispered, her voice hollow. She finally tore her gaze from the phone and looked down at Donna. "Daisy Hayes is the chief enforcer for the Detroit Syndicate. He's the man who leaves the bodies where the police can never find them." She swallowed the jagged lump in her throat. "And he's my husband." A heavy, stunned silence fell over the room, competing only with the relentless pounding of the rain against the floor-to-ceiling glass. Donna's mind, trained to calculate betrayals and alliances in fractions of a second, struggled to process the revelation. The quiet, unassuming woman who polished his desk and listened to the dark fractures of his soul was the runaway wife of the most sadistic hitman in the Midwest. Before Donna could demand an explanation, the security monitor mounted on the far wall flared to life. The building's localized perimeter alarm, silently integrated into the executive suite, flashed red. "They're in the building," Donna grunted, attempting to push himself up on his elbows. A fresh wave of crimson seeped through the quick-clot bandages Sylvia had applied. The private elevator. They bypassed the lobby security. Sylvia rushed to the monitor. The grainy black-and-white feed showed the interior of the express elevator, rocketing toward the penthouse. There were 4 men armed with suppressed Heckler and Coke MP, 5 submachine guns. Standing in the center of the car, entirely calm, was a tall man in a bespoke navy trench coat. His blonde hair was slicked back, his face a chilling mask of aristocratic boredom. Daisy. But it was the man standing next to him that made Donna let out a guttural curse. "Vincent!" Donna spat, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. His underboss, Vincent Corallo, stood shoulder to shoulder with the Detroit enforcer, casually checking the magazine of his Glock 19. It wasn't just a hit. It was a coup. Vincent had sold him out to the rival syndicate, orchestrated the ambush at the docks, and now he was bringing the executioner straight to Donna's door. "He must have disabled the biometric locks on the elevator," Donna said, his breathing growing shallow. He reached out, his bloodied hand gripping the leg of his heavy oak desk to pull himself up. "We have 90 seconds before those doors open. Get out, Sylvia. Go to the freight elevator. He doesn't know you're here." "Are you insane?" Sylvia snapped, moving back to him and throwing his heavy arm over her shoulder. Daisy's text said, "Sweep the tower. That means every floor, every closet. And he knows exactly what I look like. If I run, I die. If you stay here, you die." "I'm a dead man anyway," Donna growled, his knees buckling as she hauled him to his feet. He weighed over 200 pounds, solid muscle and bone, and the sheer effort of supporting him made Sylvia's muscles scream. "I have a Sig Sauer in the desk drawer. 2 spare mags. Take them and run. I'm not leaving you to bleed out on your Persian rug for Vincent Corallo to gloat over," Sylvia said, her voice dropping into a register of cold, terrifying authority that Donna had never heard before. It was the voice of a woman who had survived the unsurvivable. "Now walk, damn it." She dragged him toward the heavy mahogany door, but not into the main hallway. Instead, she pivoted toward the executive private bathroom. "The elevator is right down the hall," Donna protested, his head swimming. "There's no way out this way." "For an executive, no," Sylvia said, kicking the bathroom door open and dragging him inside. She practically threw him against the marble vanity to keep him upright. "For the cleaning staff, there's always a way in." Sylvia dropped to her knees in front of the massive, custom-built linen cabinet. She didn't open the doors. Instead, she reached beneath the wooden trim, her fingers finding a concealed latch she had discovered her second week on the job, when a stray mop handle had bumped it. She pulled hard. The entire bottom half of the cabinet swung outward, revealing a dark, narrow utility shaft that housed the building's central HVAC return and a rusted maintenance ladder. Oakhaven Tower was built in the late 80s, Sylvia said rapidly, pulling a small tactical flashlight from her smock pocket. They retrofitted the central air in '95, but left the old maintenance shafts intact. It drops straight down to the 40th floor. The muted ding of the private elevator echoed through the penthouse, vibrating through the walls. "They're here," Donna whispered, pulling his Sig Sauer from his waistband with a trembling hand, aiming it toward the bathroom door. "Get in," Sylvia ordered. Donna didn't argue. Driven by pure adrenaline and the desperate will to survive, he squeezed his broad shoulders into the narrow, dusty shaft. The pain in his abdomen was blinding, a hot iron twisting in his guts, but he forced himself onto the iron rungs of the ladder. Before following him, Sylvia ran back out to the main office. She grabbed her cleaning cart and shoved it violently against the heavy mahogany office doors, wedging the wheels into the carpet. It wouldn't stop them, but it would buy seconds. She sprinted back to the bathroom, grabbing a heavy bottle of industrial-grade ammonia and a jug of bleach from the under-sink storage. As she heard the heavy thud of combat boots kicking the office doors, she dumped the contents of both bottles directly onto the marble floor of the bathroom, creating a massive, highly toxic chemical puddle. She scrambled into the utility shaft, pulling the false panel shut just as she heard the office doors splinter and crash open. Instantly, the narrow shaft was plunged into suffocating darkness, smelling of dust, old iron, and copper blood. Below her, Donna let out a stifled groan of agony as he began the grueling descent. Above them, the muffled shouts of Daisy's men echoed through the penthouse. Then came the violent, hacking coughs. "Chlorine gas," Sylvia whispered into the dark, her heart hammering against her ribs. "That should clear their sinuses." "Remind me," Donna grunted from the darkness below, his voice laced with pain and a grim, undeniable awe. "Never to spill coffee on your freshly mopped floors." The descent to the 40th floor was a localized descent into hell. The maintenance shaft was barely 3 feet wide, lined with jagged sheet metal and thick layers of decades-old dust. Every movement tore at Donna's gunshot wound. Sylvia stayed directly above him, the beam of her small flashlight illuminating his blood-soaked back. She could see his muscles spasming with every agonizing step down the iron rungs. "Just a little further," Sylvia coaxed, her voice a steady, rhythmic lifeline in the claustrophobic dark. 35 steps. Count them with me, Dom." He didn't answer, his breathing reduced to ragged, wet hitches. The Don of Chicago was running on fumes, sustained only by the primal refusal to let his treacherous underboss win. When they finally reached the access grate on the 40th floor, Donna practically collapsed against it. Sylvia squeezed past him, her small frame navigating the tight space with practiced ease. She kicked the grate loose. It clattered onto the linoleum floor of a deserted utility room. She dragged Donna out of the shaft. He hit the floor hard, a heavy, unresponsive weight. "Dom! Hey, look at me!" Sylvia hissed, slapping his cheek lightly. The 40th floor was mid-level management, a labyrinth of cubicles and cheap carpet, currently plunged into the eerie, silent darkness of 3 a.m. Donna's eyelids fluttered. His skin was the color of dirty snow, slick with cold sweat. Can't walk," he gasped. "My legs are gone, Sylvia." "We can't stay here," she said, stripping off her blue cleaning smock. Underneath, she wore a simple black t-shirt. She balled up the smock and pressed it hard against his bleeding side, replacing the soaked bandages. "Daisy will figure out the shafts. He's a monster. But he isn't stupid. They'll start clearing floors." "Take the gun," Donna rasped, weakly pushing the heavy Sig Sauer toward her. "Go to the fire stairs. Get to the garage." "I told you I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely, grabbing his jaw, forcing him to look at her. 4 years ago, I ran out the back door of a house in Detroit while Daisy was beating a man to death in the living room. I told myself I survived. But I didn't. I just became a ghost. Her thumb brushed over the sharp, cold angle of Donna's cheekbone. "I'm done being a ghost." For a fleeting second, the pain in Donna's eyes receded, replaced by a profound, piercing clarity. He looked at this woman, battered, covered in his blood, her eyes blazing with a defiant fire, and realized he had never seen anything more beautiful in his violent, miserable life. He lifted his hand, his bloodied fingers wrapping gently around her wrist. "If we make it out of here," Donna whispered, his voice dangerously soft, "you're never picking up a mop again. Understood? Let's focus on living through the next 10 minutes, Mr. Castiglione," Sylvia replied, though a tight, desperate smile touched the corner of her lips. She hauled him up. Using the walls of the cubicles for support, they began to limp through the dark, cavernous floor. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the vending machines in the break room and the relentless drumming of the storm against the windows. They needed to reach the freight elevators on the east side of the building. The private elevator was compromised, and the fire stairs were too exposed. A 60-flight descent would kill Donna before they reached the ground. As they rounded the corner toward the east wing, the overhead fluorescent lights at the far end of the hallway suddenly flickered on, buzzing with a harsh, artificial hum. Sylvia shoved Donna violently to the side, tumbling with him behind a heavy oak receptionist's desk, just as the ping of the freight elevator echoed through the hall. Footsteps, heavy, tactical boots, clicking against the linoleum. "Check the server rooms," a voice barked. It wasn't Daisy. It was a younger, rougher voice, one of his Detroit hitters. Sylvia peeked around the edge of the desk. 2 men in dark, tactical gear were sweeping the corridor, their weapons raised. They were moving methodically, checking every cubicle row. It was only a matter of time before they reached the reception desk. Donna tried to raise his gun, but his hand was shaking so violently he couldn't hold it steady. He swore under his breath, leaning his head back against the wood paneling in defeat. Sylvia looked at his trembling hands, then at the heavy Sig Sauer. She had never fired a gun in her life, Daisy had never allowed it. He preferred his weapon strictly under his own control. But she knew the mechanics from cleaning Donna's office, from watching men load and unload their weapons for years. Without a word, she pried the gun from Donna's weakened grip. Donna's eyes widened in alarm. "Sylvia, no! The recoil!" "Shut up and cover your ears," she whispered. She checked the safety. Click. She stood up, bracing her forearms on the top of the receptionist's desk, adopting a tight, desperate two-handed grip. The two hitmen were 30 feet away. One of them turned, catching the movement behind the desk. "Hey!" he shouted, raising his MP5. Sylvia didn't blink. She aimed for center mass and squeezed the trigger. The roar of the 9mm in the enclosed office space was deafening. The recoil snapped her wrists back violently, sending a jolt of pain up to her shoulders, but the bullet found its mark. The first hitman took the round directly in the chest armor, the kinetic force throwing him backward into a glass partition, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The second hitman cursed, unleashing a burst of suppressed automatic fire. The bullets chewed through the front of the receptionist's desk, showering Sylvia and Donna in splinters and wood dust. Sylvia ducked down, her heart threatening to crack her ribs. She took a ragged breath, popped up from the opposite side of the desk, and fired twice more. Crack! Crack! One bullet missed entirely, embedding itself in a copy machine. The second caught the hitman in the thigh. He screamed, dropping to one knee, his weapon clattering to the floor. Before he could retrieve it, the freight elevator doors behind him chimed again. Sylvia froze, aiming the gun at the opening doors, expecting Daisy. Instead, stepping over the threshold with a chillingly calm demeanor, was Vincent Corallo. He took in the scene, his bleeding Detroit ally on the floor, the shattered glass, and the blonde cleaner standing behind the desk with a smoking gun. Vincent let out a low, amused chuckle, stepping over the groaning hitman. He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't feel the need to. "Well, well," Vincent called out, his voice echoing in the ruined hallway. "I have to admit, Dom, I thought you'd be dead in your chair. I certainly didn't expect you to be hiding behind the help." Donna, utilizing the last agonizing reserve of his adrenaline, forced himself to stand up next to Sylvia. He leaned heavily on the desk, pressing his hand against his bleeding side. He looked at the man who had been his brother, his confidant, his right hand. "You always were impatient, Vince," Donna said, his voice a lethal, vibrating baritone despite the pain. "You couldn't wait for the throne. You had to steal it." "Business is business, Dom," Vincent smiled, spreading his hands in mock apology. "Detroit offered a better percentage on the port routes. And you've gone soft, spending your nights drinking in the dark, talking to the janitor. The family needs a wolf, Dom, not a wounded dog." Vincent finally raised his Glock, aiming it casually at Sylvia's head. "Drop the gun, sweetheart. You're out of your depth." Sylvia's hands were shaking, but she kept the weapon raised. "If you shoot, I shoot," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Maybe," Vincent sneered, "but I've been doing this since I was 16. I'll put a bullet between your eyes before your finger even twitches." He tightened his grip on the trigger. "Vince," Donna said softly. Vincent's eyes flicked to his old boss. It was a fatal mistake. In the brief moment, Vincent's focus shifted. Donna didn't reach for a gun. He reached his bloodied hand forward, grabbing the heavy, bronze nameplate sitting on the edge of the receptionist's desk, and hurled it with every ounce of his remaining strength. The heavy metal block caught Vincent squarely in the jaw with a sickening crunch. Vincent stumbled backward, his gun firing wildly into the ceiling as he collapsed against the wall. "Now, Sylvia!" Donna roared. Sylvia didn't hesitate. She fired. The bullet struck Vincent Corallo in the shoulder, pinning him against the drywall. He slid to the floor, grasping his bleeding arm, his arrogant smile entirely wiped away. Donna collapsed over the desk, his energy completely spent. The world was spinning into blackness. "Let's go," Sylvia gasped, grabbing Donna and dragging him toward the open freight elevator. She shoved him inside, hitting the button for the underground parking garage. As the metal doors began to close, Vincent, gasping in pain on the floor, looked up at them with a bloody, venomous grin. "You think you won?" Vincent coughed, spitting blood onto the linoleum. "Daisy's not in the penthouse anymore. He's waiting for you at the bottom." The heavy steel doors slammed shut, sealing them in a descending metal box, plunging straight down toward the devil himself. The freight elevator's descent felt like an eternity. The grinding of the heavy steel cables was the only sound masking the wet, ragged breathing of Donna Castiglione. He was slumped against the cold metal wall, leaving a horrific smear of crimson as he slowly slid toward the grated floor. Sylvia stood in front of him, her hand still clamped around the grip of the Sig Sauer. The gun felt 10 times heavier now. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the 40th floor was beginning to curdle into a cold, nauseating dread. Daisy was waiting. "Sylvia," Donna whispered. His eyes were half closed, the dark irises almost swallowed by the blown-out pupils of shock. "In my left pocket. The keys. Black fob." Sylvia kept one hand on the gun, reaching down with her left hand to fish into the blood-soaked pocket of his trousers. Her fingers curled around a heavy metal fob. "My car. Space 01. Armored Mercedes G-Wagon," Donna gasped, his head lolling against the wall. "When the doors open, hit the red button. It's the panic alarm. Blinding LED rig. Deafening siren. It will give you 3 seconds. 3 seconds to do what?" Sylvia asked, her voice cracking. "Daisy isn't a street thug, Dom. He's a tactician. He won't be standing in the open." "You only need 3 seconds to shoot him in the face," Donna replied, his voice devoid of any hesitation. He looked at her, his expression stripping away the Mafia Don, leaving only a man fighting for the woman who had just fought for him. "He took 4 years of your life. Don't let him take the rest of it." The elevator shuddered as it passed the ground floor, descending into the subterranean levels of the Oakhaven Tower. Level B1, Level B2, Level B3. With a final heavy clank, the elevator stopped. Sylvia raised the gun, her thumb hovering over the red panic button on the fob. She stepped in front of Donna, shielding his battered body with her own. The heavy doors groaned open. The underground garage was a cavernous expanse of concrete pillars and flickering fluorescent lights. The air smelled of gasoline, damp earth, and exhaust. At first glance, it was entirely empty. The sweeping rows of luxury executive cars sat in silent darkness. "Stay behind me," Sylvia murmured, stepping cautiously over the threshold. "I wouldn't step any further, Sylvie." The voice echoed through the concrete chamber. It was smooth, cultured, and laced with a terrifying, familiar amusement. Sylvia's blood turned to ice water. From behind the concrete pillar near the elevator bank, Daisy Hayes stepped out into the dim light. He looked exactly as she remembered, impeccably tailored in a navy overcoat, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his eyes dead and unblinking. He held a suppressed Heckler & Koch USP tactical pistol, resting it casually against his leg. Flanking him was a heavy-set man Sylvia recognized from her nightmares in Detroit, Thomas Reese, Daisy's favorite cleanup guy. Thomas had a sawed-off shotgun leveled squarely at Sylvia's chest. "Drop it, Sylvie," Daisy said, taking a slow, measured step forward. His eyes drifted over her black t-shirt, the blood staining her hands, and finally rested on Donna, who was barely conscious inside the elevator car. "Look at you, covered in filth, playing nurse to a dying king," I have to admit, when Vincent called and said Castiglione's new pet was a blonde cleaner with a Detroit accent, I didn't want to believe it. My wife, scrubbing toilets for the Italians. Sylvia didn't lower the gun. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to look her abuser in the eye. I'm not your wife, Daisy. I'm a ghost. Daisy let out a cold, sharp laugh. Ghosts don't steal $3 million in untraceable bearer bonds from their husband's private safe before they disappear, sweetheart. Donna's eyes flickered open in the elevator. Despite the blood loss, a faint, impressed smirk touched his pale lips. So that was how she had funded her initial escape. You owed me more than money for what you put me through, Sylvia spat, her voice trembling with a rage she had suppressed for 4 long years. Perhaps, Daisy conceded, taking another step. He was 30 feet away now. But the bonds are gone, and you're out of time. Kick the gun away, Sylvie. If you do, I promise I'll make it quick for you. If you don't, Thomas here will blow your kneecaps off, and I will make you watch as I skin your new boyfriend alive. Sylvia's finger tightened on the trigger of the Sig Sauer. She glanced at the red button on the fob in her left hand. Space 01 was directly to Daisy's right. The massive black Mercedes G-Wagon sat silently in the shadows. Daisy, Sylvia said, her voice dropping into an eerie, dead calm. It was the same tone she used when she told Donna she would listen to his ghosts. Daisy paused, his head tilting slightly. Yes, darling. You always talked too much. Sylvia pressed the red button. The subterranean garage erupted. The G-Wagon's high-intensity LED off-road lights flared to life with the blinding brilliance of a magnesium flare, washing out the darkness with searing white light directly into Daisy and Thomas's eyes. Simultaneously, a deafening 120-decibel panic siren shrieked through the concrete acoustics of the garage, a sound so loud it vibrated the teeth in their skulls. Daisy flinched, instinctively throwing his arm up to shield his eyes from the blinding glare. Thomas staggered back, letting out a startled yell, his shotgun wavering. 3 seconds. Sylvia didn't freeze. She stepped forward, squaring her stance, just as she had seen the bodyguards do, and pulled the trigger. Crack. Her first shot took Thomas Risi in the chest. The heavy man crumpled backward, his shotgun discharging into the concrete ceiling with a booming roar, raining dust down upon the cars. Daisy, recovering faster than any normal human should, dropped to a crouch, swinging his suppressed pistol blindly toward the sound of Sylvia's gun. Sylvia fired again. The bullet clipped Daisy's shoulder, spinning him violently. His gun clattered across the pavement. But Daisy was a survivor of 100 gang wars. Ignoring the blood blossoming on his tailored coat, he lunged forward, tackling Sylvia to the concrete floor before she could adjust her aim. The Sig Sauer skittered away into the darkness. The siren continued to blare, masking the sickening thud of their bodies hitting the ground. Daisy pinned her down, his hand wrapping around her throat like a steel vise. The blinding lights of the G-Wagon cast horrific, elongated shadows across his contorted, furious face. "You stupid bitch!" Daisy hissed, his grip tightening, crushing her windpipe. Dark spots began to dance in Sylvia's vision. She clawed at his hands, her nails tearing into his skin, but his strength was overwhelming. "I gave you everything. I let you live. And you shoot me?" Sylvia choked, her lungs screaming for oxygen. She thrashed wildly, but her strength was fading. The ghost of her past was finally dragging her down into the dark. Suddenly, a wet, heavy coughing sound broke through the siren's wail. Daisy's eyes widened in shock. He looked down. Protruding from the center of his chest was the jagged, bloody end of a rusted tire iron. Daisy's grip on Sylvia's throat slackened. He let out a wet, gurgling gasp, blood spilling over his lips, and slowly collapsed sideways onto the concrete. Standing behind him, bathed in the blinding white light of the SUV, was Donna Castiglione. He had dragged himself out of the elevator, using the heavy steel tire iron from a nearby maintenance cart as a crutch and as a spear. Donna's eyes were completely dead, the face of the ruthless Mafia Don fully restored, despite the fatal amount of blood pooling at his feet. He looked down at Daisy's twitching body, then let go of the tire iron. Donna's knees finally gave out. He crashed to the concrete beside Sylvia. Sylvia rolled over, gasping frantically for air, her throat bruised and burning. She scrambled to Donna's side. His eyes were closed, his breathing almost undetectable. "Dom!" she screamed over the blaring siren. She grabbed his face, slapping his cheek. "Dom, stay with me. Don't you dare die on me now." She grabbed his keys from the floor, hit the unlock button, and dragged him the final 20 feet to the armored G-Wagon. She hoisted his dead weight into the passenger seat, slammed the door, and threw herself behind the wheel. She threw the heavy SUV into gear, the tires screaming against the concrete as she smashed through the rising exit barrier and burst out into the storm-swept streets of Chicago. Dr. Nathaniel Evans' underground clinic was hidden beneath a defunct meatpacking plant on the south side. By the time Sylvia slammed the G-Wagon into park and dragged Donna through the steel doors, he had no pulse. For 4 agonizing hours, Sylvia sat on the cold tile floor of the clinic's waiting area, staring at the blood permanently stained into her cuticles. She listened to the frantic shouts of Dr. Evans and his illicit medical team, the hum of the defibrillator, and the terrifying, prolonged silences. She had killed 2 men tonight. She had watched the monster who haunted her nightmares die on the floor of a parking garage. Yet the only thing she felt was a hollow, gaping terror that the man in the next room, the man who had listened to her just as intently as she had listened to him, was gone. Just before dawn, the heavy metal door swung open. Dr. Evans, wiping blood from his forehead, looked down at her. "He flatlined twice on the table," the doctor said gruffly. "The bullet nicked his descending aorta. But the son of a bitch is too stubborn to die. He'll make it." Sylvia let out a sob that tore from the very bottom of her soul. She rested her head against the cold tile wall and wept, not from fear, but from the overwhelming, crushing weight of survival. 6 months later, the night skyline of Chicago glittered like scattered diamonds through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Oakhaven Tower penthouse. It was 1:30 a.m. The heavy mahogany doors to the executive suite swung open. There were no bullet holes in the walls anymore. The shattered glass had been replaced, the Persian rug deeply cleaned, and the scent of blood entirely erased. Donna Castiglione stood by the window, a heavy crystal tumbler of Macallan 25 resting in his hand. He wore a tailored black suit, leaning slightly on a silver-handled cane, a permanent souvenir from the night his empire almost fell. Behind him, the soft click of heels echoed on the hardwood floor. He didn't turn around. He just smiled. Sylvia walked into the room. She was no longer wearing a navy blue smock. She wore a sleek, midnight blue silk dress that hugged her frame, her blonde hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Around her neck hung a delicate diamond pendant, a gift from the Don. A lot had changed in 6 months. Vincent Corallo had vanished from the hospital 3 days after the shootout. Rumor in the underworld was that he had been incorporated into the foundation of the New Harbor Bridge. The Detroit Syndicate, destabilized by the death of their chief enforcer, Daisy Hayes, had been systematically dismantled and absorbed by the Castiglione family. Donna hadn't just survived. He had ruthlessly purged his ranks, restructuring his empire with a terrifying, calculated precision. And he hadn't done it alone. The woman who used to empty his trash cans was now his most trusted advisor. Sylvia had an instinct for human nature, for detecting lies and vulnerabilities that rivaled any seasoned capo. She sat in on the high-level meetings. She reviewed the ledgers. The men who used to ignore her now lowered their heads in deep respect when she walked into the room. They knew she had pulled the trigger that saved the Don. They knew she was the untouchable queen of the Chicago syndicate. Sylvia walked up beside Donna, looking out over the city. "The shipments from the docks are secure," she said softly, "and the new route through the northern suburbs is clear. Jenko's old crew has fully integrated." "Good," Donna murmured. He turned his head, his dark eyes tracing the line of her jaw. The heavy, suffocating loneliness that used to define him was completely gone. He set his glass down on the desk. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing over the faint, silvery scar on her neck where Daisy had choked her. It was a testament to what they had survived. "It's quiet tonight," Donna whispered, leaning in closer. Sylvia smiled, a slow, magnetic curve of her lips. She reached up, her fingers threading into the lapel of his suit, pulling him down to her eye level. "Do you want me to listen?" she teased softly. Donna leaned down, capturing her lips in a deep, bruising kiss that tasted of scotch and absolute devotion. "No," he murmured against her mouth. "I want you to rule." Power is still the loudest thing in the room, but the silence no longer belongs to ghosts. High above the glittering grid of Chicago, the Oak Haven penthouse stands not as a gilded cage, but as an impenetrable fortress for two survivors. Donna Castiglione, the ruthless king of the underworld, finally found a partner whose shadows matched his own. Sylvia Hayes traded her cleaning smock for a crown, proving that the most dangerous forces often enter quietly, unseen by arrogant men. Their love was forged in violence, sealed in blood, and cemented by an unbreakable loyalty. They don't just run the city, they own the night. And as the city sleeps far below, the Mafia Don no longer sits alone in the dark. Beside him sits the woman who swept away his enemies, holding his heart just as tightly as she once held the gun.